Suchi. She's Vice Chancellor for Research and Economic Development at the University System of Maryland, and Dick Seligman, our Interim Executive Director of FDP. I would like to welcome you to our meeting. I'm so pleased that we've had so many people join us this morning. As of this morning, we had over 700 registrants, and we're all looking forward to a really exciting program. I want to thank Barbara Gardner of Tufts University, our chair of the program committee, as well as all the members of that committee that have, for all of the huge amount of effort and time that they've dedicated to creating this strong program. And I'm confident that you will agree that we have a lot of great sessions. And I also want to send a special thank you to Sarah and Dick for offering a tremendous amount of support throughout this whole planning process. I think our biggest news is that in May 2023, we will be having an in-person meeting. Looking forward to reconnecting in person and being able to devote some time to our working groups and demonstrations and focusing on some of our key initiatives in addition to the program. And this will be the first time that we'll have an opportunity to meet in person since the COVID pandemic began. Our January meeting is scheduled for the January 23rd to 26th. That will be in a virtual format. And the details for all of these meetings you can find posted on the FDP website. Just as a reminder, it's not too late to register. So if you have colleagues from your institutions that are interested, please welcome them to join. We'd love it. And regarding our business since last May, I just wanted to provide some updates on a few initiatives that we've been focusing on. First and foremost, we're making great progress in developing a framework for increasing our engagement with our federal partners through the Federal Engagement Working Group. And we're continuing to monitor and plan for changes in the research security environment. You'll hear a little bit about that in one of our sessions this week. And we're working with our federal partners and institutional members. Regarding that, we've actually rebranded our export controls subcommittee under the Research Compliance Committee as the Research Security Subcommittee. So you'll be seeing more about their upcoming activities and likely hear about them during this meeting, during the Compliance Committee meeting. We're making great strides in finding our permanent director, executive director for FDP. You probably have seen, we sent out a call earlier this summer, and Michelle's going to give you a little bit more details regarding that. Regarding our meetings, we've made some great progress considering the future of FDP meetings, and we really appreciate your input. You probably recall that a survey went out this past summer, and we're in the process of summarizing the great input we've received. And this is everything from the length of the meeting, the modality, whether in person or virtual, and general organization, how many days, things like that. I want to thank Rod Splitgerber and the whole Reimagining FDP committee for pushing this towards the finish line, and we think that'll be in the next month or coming months, month or two. We also have a strategic communication plan that has been developed. I think we talked about it last in May, and we're moving on to the implementation phase. And this involves rethinking our digital media platforms, social media, how best to get the word out and keep our members and the research community at large informed of FDP progress. And then we are also working on a request for a proposal. We're looking for an evaluation partner to undertake implementing an evaluation plan for FDP mid-phase and final phase. And with this, I'm going to hand this over to Michelle.
Thank you so much, Alex. Good morning and welcome to our FDP meetings. I really want to echo what Alex said about the work that so many people do on behalf of this organization, and thank all of our participants who help us to move our program plan forward and to participate in activities in between our meetings. It is really the greatest part about this organization is the volunteer effort that all of you undertake, and we're so appreciative of being able to move our agenda forward through your efforts. And I just want to acknowledge that in particular around this program, we have so many volunteers who support by taking notes, ensuring that materials and videos are posted on the website after the meetings are over, They facilitate our committee work and ongoing demonstrations through the years. So again, I want to thank everybody for the work that they've been doing to help keep us moving forward with our agenda. As Alex noted, we're in the midst of our executive director search. We're really pleased that Dick Seligman is continuing to serve as the interim executive director for the FDP. I'm not exactly sure he knew what he was signing on for when he agreed to do this, but we are very, very pleased that he is continuing to support us. But in the meantime, we're well underway in the process to identify and hire a new executive director who can build on the success of the past 15 years under David Wright's direction. The announcement for a search for candidates was released earlier this summer, and we need your help. We seek your input on nominations. We seek your self-nominations and your applications. The phase that we're in of the search right now is to build our applicant pool. And what we are doing is reaching out to each and every person who either expresses an interest or was identified by the community as someone that we should be talking to. And our hope is to build out a robust applicant pool through this process. Please don't hesitate to be in touch and know that we will continue to work on this process until we have found a director that can move us forward. I also want to highlight our continuing relationship with the National Academies. We do this through the Division of Policy and Global Affairs, and with GWIR, the Government University Industry Research Roundtable, which plays the important role of convening the FDP. We are grateful for the support that we receive from the academies and appreciative of the work that Tom Arison, Program Director with the Division of Policy and Global Affairs at the National Academies, has played serving as the senior advisor to the Federal Demonstration Partnership these past 8 months since Susan Sloan retired. And then, you know, in case you would have missed it, it was announced last week that Michael Nestor has become the new director of GWIR. He joins GWIR with the experience as a scientific engagement lead at J Labs in Washington, D.C., a AAAS Science and Technology Fellow in the Advanced Scientific Computing Research Division, and president of Synaptum. We hope our FDP colleagues will provide him with a warm welcome in his new role at GWIR, and we look forward to continuing our longstanding partnership with GWIR and with the academies. Today's program will begin with a session with NIH, OSP, and OPERA covering implementation of the new data management and sharing policy, which will go into effect in January of 2023. Later in today's program, we have planned a coffee hour to discuss topics of interest for all our members. So I hope that you will go grab some coffee or tea and jump back into that session, because we've had lots of lively discussions since implementing this particular component of our program. And then the day today will conclude with our federal updates. There are some additional sessions throughout the program I want to call your attention to that I think you may find of interest. First, tomorrow we begin with a session that focuses on the Ukrainian crisis and how it is affecting the research enterprise. On Wednesday, there's a session on Build America, Buy America, for those of you who are interested to learn more about that program. On Thursday, NSF is hosting a session on graduate research fellowships, and you could find information about that program and how to work with NSF on identifying appropriate resources for your university. And then finally, don't forget that we have a closeout for this meeting with our committee's report and update on Thursday afternoon. So without further delay, I want to welcome you to the morning's plenary on new data management and sharing policy. And I'm going to turn it over to Christy Keene, who will introduce our speakers and moderate the session.
Thanks, Michelle. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's session, NIH implementation of the new data management and sharing policy. My name is Christy Keene. I'm the Senior Director of Research Finance at the University of Chicago. I'm excited today to be joined by Michelle Bowles, Director of the NIH Office of Policy for Extramural Research Administration. We are really excited to have Michelle and several of her colleagues with us today, and she's going to be providing a lot of great information, including how FDP is partnering with NIH in this endeavor. I think you're going to find this session to be very helpful, and you may have some additional questions. And so we will be moderating the Q&A today and hope to answer some of those questions while we're here together. With that, I'll turn it over to Michelle to get us started. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christy, and welcome to today's plenary session. I'm excited to be here to join you guys. I'm joined by my colleagues, both within the Office of Policy for Extramural Research Administration, my staff, Xanthia James. Also want to give a special thanks to Taunton Payne and OSP, as well as Cindy Danielson within OER. Both of those groups have helped us pull our slide deck together today. We are truly in partnership with OSP as well as in partnership with the FDP. So I'm excited about talking to you a little bit about what you should expect, helping you recognize that we know that there will be some impact on our institutions, and what we plan to do to help mitigate some of those impacts. So without further ado, on first slide, please. As you well know, effective January 25th, 2023, our policy goes into effect that will require researchers to provide prospective plans on how the scientific data will be preserved and shared through the submission of a DMS plan. And of course, this new policy does replace our 2003 policy. So that will be rescinded and the new policy will go into effect. It applies to all research funded in whole or in part by NIH, where the results generate scientific data. And for many of you, most of you know that that's a lot of our research projects, but NIH has taken the time to identify those projects that it does not apply to, so that it's very clear in the policy implementation, in our FAQs, as well as guide notices, as well as our application instructions as to which policies and which activity codes this does not apply to. It will require, as I said, to have our institutions submit data management sharing plans outlining how scientific data and accompanying metadata will be managed and shared, and taking into account potential restrictions and limitations. We also want to make sure that the compliance component is very much centered within the administering IC, which is the NIH Institute or center that will be administering the project. Next slide, please. And so we talked a little bit about initially sharing the intent, the potential impact on recipients. And for many of you, you guys know that that is very important to me, to the NIH, especially to OER. We work really hard to try to reduce administrative burden. That's where our Paperwork Reduction Act functions sit within OER Opera. And so making certain that the flexibilities and the administrative burdens are taken into existence and into account, we look at these following things. So we wanted to make sure, one, that the flexibility of the NIH's ICs to develop their own IC-specific data sharing requirements is limited. We really want to make certain that whatever is required, we can give you a broad, general, standard data sharing requirement and try to have that apply for all ICs. Now, we know that all ICs are different just by nature and by the nature of the research that they fund and support, but we want to make sure that anything that we put into place, it will fit the overarching need from the NIH Central, and of course, executing it through the recipients. Potential additional information for plans incurred during project period. We want to make sure that that is not something that we don't think about at the time of the original application. So we don't want to think about these costs that are not considered at the outset. We do recognize that there may be costs that come into play later, but we want to minimize that. And so again, we've looked at that component. And then another one, of course, is the planning for your implementation of costs for programs and providing budget caps for funding, looking at that and the impact that that will have on program costs, of course, F&A costs and that kind of thing. The goal really is to continue to support and maximize our ability to provide funding to support research. And so in this space, we of course will be looking at that. And then some of the data may carry explicit limitations on sharing, and we recognize that. We recognize that with various communities. We recognize that with the types of projects and the types of activity codes that we fund. So we're looking at that across the board. And then, of course, it may require planning for long-term storage and archiving data beyond the performance period. And we know that that will definitely be a factor. Next slide. And so NIH's efforts to reduce administrative burden is really coming into play with the DMS demonstration pilot project. I am just extremely thrilled to be in collaboration with FDP and to have this pilot partnership going on and starting, especially in this very important space. Now, we've been talking about this for probably 6 months to a year, and it's finally come to pass and in fruition. We are really working hard within our groups to put the plan and the timeline in place, and we'll share a bit about that later. But the one thing that I want to remind people of is that FDP, in collaboration with NIH and the other OER SMEs, as well as NIH ICs, the collaboration could be dynamic. We've seen, for those of us that have been members of FDP for a long time, we've seen just how fruitful it can be to have the demonstration and the collaboration between our member partners and the federal partners. We have seen firsthand where we have been able to reduce administrative burden and even modify regulations as a result of the FDP pilot collaborations. And so having this opportunity to get input from our FDP partners and members, as well as sharing our concerns from the NIH perspective, and having those two married and melt together, I think will be a beautiful outcome. I'm really excited that the goals of the project will definitely generate the greater consistency across the institutes and centers and the programs. The goal really is to outline and share how we might have 2 or 3 management plans that we might want to use, because it truly is needed for the types of research that we're doing across the ICs. But it's definitely not needed to have 24 different plans, so that when we complete our demonstration, we can outline, what's, our general plan, something that's a little more less needed, and something that we, a little bit more robust, and really be able to embrace it and understand the impact and the outcome, and be able to show that these are truly the plans that we need, and have that buy-in both from FDP members as well as our NIH institutes and centers, and of course, all of the recipients, whether FDP or not. So the goal really is to mitigate that administrative burden for researchers, and so that it's associated with the DMS plan development and implementation. So I think it's just going to be a really great opportunity to once again show that when we get into a pilot with the FDP, the federal members as well as the FDP members can truly come up with something that is palatable, and that we can all say that we gave it our all and we get the best result, which is to share the data, but share it in a way that does not cause and create a lot of churn and administrative burden in the community. Next slide. So just to get into a little bit about the implementation of the demonstration project, we are going to have 2 phases. And it's been really interesting with the group, our member group, for us to just try to focus on that first phase and not inch into the second phase, which is the area of cost policies. And we all know that that's the piece that everybody is really looking at. But we want to be very intentional and very deliberate about the phases, just to make sure that as we move forward within this timeline, by the end of that pilot, we need to be able to come back with a product that we believe both the FDP and the NIH programs, we believe is exactly what we want, intend, and will generate the best data. So the test, the first phase is testing standardized DMS plan templates and testing the DMP tool. And we initially started out with a really robust timeline. And then just really said, as we're going through, as we've implemented other policies at NIH, it took us a year to kind of really ebb and flow and go through the bumps and the kinks and work out some of the details. And so one of the things we did was we took a step back to say, let's give this a good year of the demonstration. And so what we'll do is we'll give it from December 2022 to December 2023 to for the pilot participants to test the effectiveness of the new web DMP tool templates, as well as support the generation of a DMS plan that is compliant with the new NIH policies and meets the varying needs of the ICs. And so that could be one where we would have all required, and so, or it could be two where we have some required and some optional depending on the IC, or three, it's just general. And I think we just all need to be open, knowing that we have to stick to the requirements of the NIH policy, but also identifying where there might be some overlap. And we really just don't need that extra data field because we're capturing it somewhere else, and really putting ourselves in a more flexible and open position so that we can look at it from both sides of the coin, knowing that it's one coin, if you will. And then, of course, phase two will be the cost policies, where we will establish common cost principles, identify the types of costs required, and then, of course, determining how to identify additional and unforeseen costs that may be required to meet the spirit of the data sharing policy, and looking at that and determining whether or not we would want to do some sort of rate. However we look at that, it would need to be, again, in a very open, unique, transparent way. And so we're really excited about the phase two. We're looking at that in terms of collecting all of the data in the first year, kind of looking at what kinds of costs did we identify? What kinds of unforeseen costs didn't we anticipate? Or, did we need more costs? Did we need less? How did it look? How did it feel? Did we need to think about other types of costs that we need to consider that we never considered at the outset? And so that full year of the first part of the plan will help inform that second phase of the demonstration pilot. And so we're looking forward to that. So the third area here is the timeline for the implementation. And so we're starting our initial planning, and we've been at that for about a month or so, pre-planning. And now the initial planning is set for September through November. Again, December through January will be the first phase of the pilot, and then, of course, the second phase for data collection. And providing the feedback to the NIH as well as the community, being transparent so that everyone sees what the outcome of the pilot and the results are, and the collection pieces are, and then us making an informed decision of how we need to nuance the requirements, or expand on them or pull some back. So that's kind of the demonstration pilot implementation slide. Next slide, please. And so we had some additional efforts where we've already tried to reduce administrative burden. And so we don't want anyone to think that we haven't been at the forefront of thinking about this, and that the pilot is going to be the end all be all. But I also want to say that we often know, and for those of us that have been in the research administration and grants administration game for a while, we know that, the federal partners, we think we know what you need to reduce administrative burden. So we take our steps. The pilot is just that next step to say, yeah, we think we know what you need, but we want to partner with you so that we can all figure it out together. But as a result of our not additional, but really us thinking about how to reduce the burden on our recipients at the outset, we did look at the preview version of the recommended but not optional data management sharing format, and it's now available and will be available with the instructions that my staff, my team, and OSP worked on in a really, really great fashion, along with Cindy Danielson and Julia Slussman within OER. Just a great team, collaborated really well together, came up with our application and form instructions, and we hope that it will be very helpful to our community. We also have applicants that are subject to both the DMS and GDS policies. We said, look, you only need to submit one plan, and that will include your GDS plan. So that's another area that we've tried to minimize burden. And then, of course, requesting direct costs to the supported activities that will be indicated in the DMS sharing costs and the application budget, and allowing recipients to request those costs at the outset. And that, of course, is an administrative burden reduction, but we also know that we are going to need to work with you all on making sure that we don't violate the cost principles, and we can not place our recipients in an audit situation as well. And so we're well of that. But again, that was an effort to reduce burden. Of course, we have the fact that peer reviewers will not score the DMS plans unless it's integral to the project's design and tied to a score review criteria. And then NIH will permit applicants to revise the DMS plans when needed through the just-in-time process prior to award. Applicants also can describe any limitations to sharing the data in these DMS plans that will be considered by the program officials. And then, of course, applicants can select a data repository of their choosing, unless the funding opportunity, of course, requires the use of a specific data repository. And we're going to be looking at a little bit of that in the FDP pilot, because what we can imagine is that, applicants might decide that they want to identify a data repository, but every IC decides that they want the recipients to do something different. So we're going to be looking at that and trying to make that a bit more transparent, and helping the IC see how that might be a burden to our community, and what we can do to minimize that impact. Next slide. And so a lot of times we've heard about, questions about how will these plans be assessed? Will they be peer reviewed? What's the real deal behind that? And so applications will provide DMS costs up front in the budget and budget justifications of the applications, and as specified in the funding opportunity. But what will happen is the program staff at the administering IC will assess the plans to ensure that all of the elements have been adequately addressed, and they'll assess the reasonableness of those responses. Peer reviewers may provide comments on the reasonableness of the budget, but they will not impact, those comments won't impact the score. Peer reviewers will not be provided separate DMS plans unless the sharing of the data is integral to the project design and specified in the FOA. If it is integral to that project and in the FOA, the program staff will assess the adequacy of the plan, but of course the peer reviewers, because it's a part of the project design, it's the purpose of the project, the peer reviewers will review the score criteria that is outlined in the FOA. And then, of course, applications that are selected for funding will only be funded if the DMS plan is complete and if it's acceptable. And of course, that will be happening through just in time if the plan is not acceptable at the time that the application is submitted, and that will be noted as well. So next slide. We want to always keep our community in the know, and so we are blasting out a great deal of a lot of resources. We have a data management and sharing policy website that OSP and OER staff have worked on, and it's a really great website for you guys to go out and take a look. We have a lot of frequently asked questions, and that is a living website. We will add to it as we need to, and as our policy is informed. implemented, and the FDP pilot informs some of the questions and answers that we might identify. And then, of course, we have a litany of all of our NIH guide notices that we've put out just to make sure that our folks are, again, in the know. And we want to make sure that our website, which houses and will point to many of these policies, is informed as well. So breaking those out for you so that you don't have to wade through. And we have them right here for your use. And I believe that is the end of the presentation. If you have questions, we have all of the various contacts here. We look forward to working with you. Again, I'm really excited about this FDP demonstration pilot. It's been a long time in the making, and I think it's going to be a great opportunity to, again, show how well, when we work with our FDP members, how well things can just be implemented and burden can be truly reduced, and we can come together as a community to maximize the end game, which is to share data. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Yeah, I just want to reiterate what Michelle said. When we were thinking about this pilot initially, I think we all had costs on the brain. But hearing from NIH and Michelle's team, it was really helpful to think about this from the other angle, that as the plans are being built, how does that impact the costs? So thinking about it, not with costs at the forefront, but the actual plan, because that is truly what's going to impact the costs associated to the institutions, to the researchers. And so we are really excited to continue the work that we've started and to be sharing with the community and getting everyone involved that wants to be involved in the pilot. So there will definitely be more information coming. And thank you to the working group that I know is anxiously awaiting information and helping us get started. So we appreciate your patience. And as the working group, we'll get together and we'll start working on this. So thank you so much. And I think we have some questions coming into the Q&A. So perhaps we can start moderating some of those. I don't know, Xanthia, if you wanted to help with some of the questions, or how we wanted to answer those that are most at the forefront of everyone's mind. We also had some additional questions after the first NIH session a few weeks ago that hopefully we can address today as well.
So Christy, would you like for Xanthia to read the questions, or are you going to read the questions and we will answer them?
I think it'll help if Xanthia could read the questions, and that way we
Okay. Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'll start with the first question. If institutions, no, I'm sorry. Is that the first? Yes. If institutions must be compliant with the NIH policy by January 2023, how does the timeline of the pilots with the end dates in late 2023 support this first year of compliance for institutions? Michelle, would you like
So I'll start and then whoever else can jump in.
Okay.
And so one of the things that we're trying to do is the pilot does not negate compliance, right? The pilot is to help inform compliance. And so the compliance requirements and the need to submit the plan is still at place. And the recipients will have to do that. What we will be doing, though, however, is as we are going through the pilot and recipients are submitting plans and going through this process, member institutions, we do want to hear from you guys. We want to understand what the complexities are. We do want to understand what the requirements and how the requirements are impacting costs and how the requirements are being managed at the institution. We do anticipate some level of flexibility because we do want to make sure that the first year works for everyone. And we know it's not going to roll out perfectly. but we do anticipate that all recipients, comply with what is in the funding opportunity announcement, as well as what's outlined in the terms and conditions of the award. So compliance is at play at the outset. NIH understands that there may be some nuances that we will need to work with, but the challenges that the recipients and applicants have during this first year will help inform the pilot. Next
Okay.
question, Xanthia.
Yes. So the next question is, have any ICs considered the use of a rubric for reviewing data management sharing plans? And I'm going to ask our colleagues from OSP to take this on. Cindy, would you like to respond?
Sure, I can start responding to this one. And so just kind of to preface this, the decision made in the final policy was that NIH program staff at the proposed funding institute or center would be the ones to assess the adequacy of a DMS plan, whether it is acceptable as is or more information is needed. And so we've been thinking very hard about how we can provide some information to staff to help them do so in a consistent way as much as possible, while still understanding that each DMS plan from a distinct research project will look quite different, and the plans must be assessed in the context of the proposed research. And so we're trying to support staff in making sure they know how to walk through the information in a DMS plan, look at each of the elements and determine for the proposed research, is that acceptable or not? Is each response reasonable? And so we are trying to kind of bring that consistency while still acknowledging that individual institutes, centers, and offices may also build upon the DMS policy. They, in some cases, have some specific expectations for certain data repositories or standards that might need to be used. And so there's definitely a balance between trying to make things as consistent across the board while still making sure that the goals of each program are met. So good question, and we're definitely thinking about that. Not sure if any other colleagues have anything to add.
Does anyone else like to jump in and add any additional comments for that question? Okay, I'll move on to the next one. Let's see. Okay, so please address how compliance will be monitored and enforced. Will the DMP compliance be subject to review after the fact? And what will be the consequences for non-compliance? This may be an issue when faculty leave an institution. I'm actually going to see if my colleague Carrie would like to respond to this, and then I'll open it up to others from OSP. And Michelle, if you'd like to jump in as well, that would be great.
Yeah, I'll take the compliance piece too, because it falls within our area.
Okay. Okay, Carrie, would you like to?
Sure, I'll start, and then Michelle, if you want to jump in on that one. So we are still working out some of the details around the specifics of compliance with the plan. As we review these plans and they become acceptable, they will be documented within NIH, and then each IC will be responsible for, keeping up and making sure that each recipient is following that plan. So as the recipients are reporting what they're doing related to that plan in their RPPRs and other documentation, there will be some review of those plans and ensuring that the recipient again is following that plan. But we're still working out some of the details on that. Michelle, did you want to add something, or Xanthia? I saw you unmuted as well.
Yeah, no, I think because this, so this is going to fall under our standard Division of Grants compliance and oversight world, right? Where if a plan is submitted and the plan is not followed and it's not identified appropriately in the RPPR, and then NIH will try to work with our recipients. That's always our default, is to work with the recipients to try to bring them back into compliance. If in fact there's a challenge with bringing our recipient back into compliance, or there's a need to modify the plan, then we will work with the institute or center as well as the recipient community to identify the changes that are needed, and to make sure that we can refocus the plan but set it in stone again and then reset. The challenge, though, is going to be that if the recipient is not compliant, and we've worked with the recipient as we normally do, we will have to, take our normal remedies for non-compliance actions, which is, possibly withholding the future awards. Of course, nobody wants to get to withholding of funds totally, or suspending or terminating an award. So I do anticipate our ability to really work with the recipients and work with the institutes and centers to make sure that our standard compliance guidance is in effect, and that we are working with you all to make sure that if there are challenges, we can identify those before they become non-compliant, and go from there.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else from OSP have anything to add? All right, we'll move on to the next question. Let's see. How should institutions think about the cost of maintaining access to data from grants that have expired? And where can those costs be charged? I can actually speak to that question. So here in NIH, we do recognize that this scenario could actually occur. And we're currently internally working on a strategy for addressing situations where the recipient may need additional support beyond the period of performance. So we're more is to come on that. We will certainly provide that additional guidance prior to the implementation of the new DMS plan. So just letting you know that we do recognize that could be the case, and we are planning to address that in the near future.
I think you nailed that, Xanthia. Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to the next question. Will there be any impact on subawards and subrecipients? Does this put additional burden on PTEs? Okay, I'd like to ask, Michelle, would you like to jump in on that, or would someone from OSP like to respond to that question?
Well, I can respond to the subrecipient requirement. If
Okay.
OSP has something different to add, I'm happy to stand down on that one.
Okay.
Okay, so this is really a kind of a costing question and requirements question for subs under grants administration. So the bottom line then is that if there is a DMS plan that's required by the subrecipient, that the term and condition flows down to the sub. It will be the responsibility of the primary recipient to obtain that information, and then, of course, submit it within the application. The compliance, of course, is at the prime institution level. And so we anticipate that there will be some text in the sub agreement that will address this as well. There needs to be a clear understanding between the prime and the sub as to what the expectations are for costs, and when those costs are not met or run over or they're under. And there may need to be some expectations about when the plans are required, when the non-compliance is required, if there's a challenge with the plan that the subrecipient has in place, that does need to be addressed in the written agreements as well. I think that is going to be something that is going to be additional. I don't count it as burden just because, with subs, we know that everything that's required by the prime flows down to the subrecipient. I think the only additional piece that we will see and expect is that the written agreement address what happens when the plan is not met or when there isn't a sufficient plan. And if that is something that is automatically happening now, and the subrecipients are, doing what they need to do because the prime recipients already told told them through the written agreements, then that is perfectly fine. But I don't anticipate an additional burden, if you will.
Thank you.
Just to add a little bit of the FDP perspective on this particular point, if it's helpful. I don't believe we have any of our subawards co-chairs on the panelists right now. But I do believe that this topic has come up recently for that subcommittee for consideration. And the need to be able to flow down the data management and sharing plan requirement did exist under the 2003 policy. We did have some examples where there was an overarching data management plan that needed to be flowed down to subrecipients. So already in the FDP subaward templates, there is an option to indicate that there is a plan, to facilitate attachment of the plan and clarify requirements. I think the challenge here is that just now a much larger population of our subawards we may need to implement that option and think about ways to perhaps ensure at the proposal stage that everyone is clear on the requirements, as well as just making sure that that's as a low burden an option to flow down the requirement as possible. So not a totally new concept for us, and I think our subawards group is already on it.
That's great. And I think what we can do is add a FAQ to make sure that folks understand that as well. Thanks, Melissa, always.
Thank you. And I'm going to read the next question. The DMS template is a good idea and the text examples will be helpful. Will there be a process for ensuring that any revisions to the data management sharing plan will be recorded with the institution to make sure everyone is on the same page? I'm going to ask Carrie, would you like to jump in to provide a response to this one?
Sure. As we mentioned before, those revisions to the plan can take place during the just-in-time process. So during that time, the staff at the IC will be in close contact with the institution to let them know what changes need to be made to that plan, work together to get those revisions. Once the revisions are made and that plan has been deemed acceptable to NIH, that will be sort of the approved plan, and that will be kept in the grant folder here at NIH. So we have an official copy of that final version, and also coordinated with the institution. I have that in the records as well. And I see Cosima turned on her camera, so I think she has something she'd like to add to this answer as well.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add in to echo what Carrie was saying. We're also working very diligently with our colleagues in ERA to ensure that the enhancements are made to our just-in-time module, to the grant folder, as well as to the RPPR and other post-award submission vehicles, so that if a new revised plan needs to be submitted, that not only can you submit it electronically in that avenue, but also that you'll be able to see that updated version within the external grant folder for your convenience.
Thank you for that, Cosima.
Xanthia, before you go to the next question, I just want to stop here and see if any of my colleagues within our FDP pilot membership wants to jump in. Jim, do you have anything you want to add? Or can't hear you. No. Nope.
Well, Jim is troubleshooting his audio, and I can see that he's trying to reconnect now. I think we're really excited about the opportunity for this pilot, because I think it will be a great opportunity for us to try to work on answers to many of these questions together. I was thinking in particular the question related to a rubric for review of data management sharing plans. One of the things that we'll need to come up with as part of the pilot is that, right? What would a scorecard be if we're trying to make sure that it's a low burden but effective option for researchers to be filling out the plan, as well as something that is effective for the programs and getting them the information that they need. And we can be working together on refining what some of those review requirements might look like. But Jim, maybe your audio is fixed now. What do we think?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. So Melissa, you said exactly what I was going to say. I mean, as Michelle mentioned, we're very much, we've conducted the pre-planning or the pre-planning of what this pilot will be. And as we transition to this next phase, it's really going to take, a good amount of work from the FDP membership to make sure that we develop a pilot demonstration that really has the ability to collect all the information that's being asked in these questions. And that means, a lot of faculty input. That means direct feedback from data management and sharing plans as they're submitted. It means a strong venue for questions to arise as we're going through the process to collect the data. And as Michelle has mentioned, NIH is really all in this, in the pre-planning and in the commitment to do this right. So all of these questions will be saved so that we can make sure that we develop processes in the pilot to collect them, and we'll work through all these things as we go through it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, Xanthia. I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but I saw that someone asked about how many pilot institutions we're looking to engage and if we're still accepting. So while we're talking about the FDP pilot, if I could just maybe try to answer some of those questions. So I think that we are, as Michelle mentioned, kind of still in, we've kind of come through our pre-planning phase and really in the initial planning. And as we refine sort of the ask, exactly what we would be asking pilot participants to do, we'll start to engage participants. So don't worry if you feel like you may have missed an opportunity to participate. That's not the case at all. We will certainly make sure that it is very obvious to anyone who would like to participate when we're looking to engage participants. I think that we're hoping for at least a sample of 100 plans. More than that would, of course, be better. And so we're looking for maybe faculty that are NIH funded who are really interested in participating, or institutions that have a lot of NIH funding. But we'll be sure to send out all of the details for those that are interested in participating. But sorry, back to you, Xanthia.
No worries. Let's see, we'll go to the next question, which is who will be required to sign off or verify compliance with the DMS plan? Is it the PI, an institutional office, or both? So I'd like to ask my colleague Carrie to jump in and respond to that question. And then I will also open it up to other folks, Cosima or Michelle, if you also have something to add.
Sure. And I'm sorry, I just lost the question on the screen. And I can definitely open this up to either Cosima or if Michelle or the OSB team have a different, more complete answer. But I believe the plan is going to be signed off on by the signing official, but I would like someone to verify that for me, please.
Okay. Cosima, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, so just from the application submission perspective, of course, the authorized organization representative will sign off on the application in its whole and entirety and certify as part of the application submission with their grants.gov credentials. And then when we get to the point of the RPPR submission, then the signing official will sign off on the ERA Commons RPPR module from the submission perspective.
That's exactly right, Cosima. And so internally, there are typically processes within the institution where the researcher or the PI will need to work within their internal signing structures. But when it's submitted in the RPPR, lots of times we know that the PI is sometimes that individual that submits it, and then the signing official will sign off on it and actually submit it in through ERA. So there is an expectation that the institution works with the researcher because the institution is responsible to the NIH because that's where the relationship lies. But the institution will need to make certain that they are comfortable with the plan. And if there are changes that are made to the plan, that they will need to work with their researchers and faculty members to make sure that they're in agreement before they submit that plan to NIH, because that needs to be an internal agreement. Once it comes to NIH, it becomes that final agreement, and then we go from there to implement it. So I think it's just important that we have all of the internal processes for whatever the institutions do internally, knowing that once it's submitted to NIH, it's submitted by the business official and becomes that final plan that NIH will accept.
Okay,
Thanks, Jim.
thank you. Okay, so
Xanthia, can I
sure.
follow up
Jim
on that?
has a question, Xanthia.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. I think this topic and costing will be the issues that come up for the next, 2 to 12 months. Costing, we know all those reasons, just the complexity of the process and so forth. But this issue, as we've discussed a little bit in the pre-planning, there's so many diverse parties that are part of this whole process, whether it be the libraries and the IT group and the PI, postdocs might be involved. I mean, the breadth of offices that are involved in this creates a real challenge for an institution to manage this. So I just call that out again, Michelle and Carrie and everyone else, just to reiterate that this will be a topic we come back to again and again and again to make sure that institutions are in the right position to be able to do this. Tom, did you have a thought?
Yeah, if I could just add one point here. So I think it's also important to distinguish between sort of the application and the element of the plan as well that relates to sort of who at the institution, will be sort of overseeing implementation of the plan and sort of carrying it out. So there are certainly rules, I think, in place, in terms of the application side. In terms of what the policy says, it doesn't indicate sort of a specific, unit within an institution or sort of role that has to be listed there specifically. So there is, I think, some, flexibility for institutions. And I think those are good points you raised, Jim, about, those being sort of questions that, institutions will need to work through in the future.
Thank you.
Yeah, it will differ from institution to institution. So I think us having the pilot and working through some of those areas together will help as well.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone have any other questions or comments on that piece? All right, we'll move on to the next question. Are there examples of ideal or best practice data sharing management plans to share across our campus to researchers? So Tonson, I'll let you take on that one.
Great, thanks. So right now, there are a couple of examples of data management and sharing plans. And by that, what I mean is sort of samples using that same form that we published a draft format page for that contain all the elements that are described in the policy that we would recommend to be part of a data management and sharing plan, sort of filled out as if for a research project. So I believe NIMH makes 4 examples available. We do have plans to sort of augment this going forward. And so there may be more, and the ones that exist may be updated over time. I do also want to draw, your attention to the FASEB DataWorks project, which is actually running a series of prizes to get people to sort of solicit, example data management and sharing plans, and they can win some small cash prizes for that. I think there's a deadline coming up in early October, so we, anticipate that there'll be some coming from that as well.
Thank you. Does anyone else have anything to add?
The only thing I will say is that I'm sure that through the pilot, we will be able to obtain some best practices as well. I know Melissa and her group have had some of that discussion as well. And I think that that is something that I look forward to, and we look forward to having her and her team and others share the plans and the best practices that they've developed and that they've obtained from others.
Okay, thank you. Okay, here's another question. If there are data management plans in place and signed off at the award stage with JIT in parentheses, will institutions need prior approval from NIH before changing the plan downstream? The answer to that is yes. If there are any changes post-award, the institution will be expected to report any changes to their program official and get approval from that program official for those changes. Does anyone else from Opera or OSP have anything to add to that? Okay. I think the majority of the other questions are relevant to the budget piece and also compliance as well. And as I mentioned earlier, we are currently working out those strategies internally, and we'll be issuing additional guidance in the near future. But we're going to certainly take note of these questions and make sure that we provide responses both in our future guidance and in our FAQs. Are there any other items that any other questions that we want to cover outside of those areas? I think the majority of them we would probably need to defer to a later time to cover.
So Xanthia, there was just one question about the communities that were engaging in the pilot that I'd like to answer, if that's all right.
Sure. Yeah.
And the question was related to the library community, because we love our library community and they're extremely helpful in this space in helping to provide guidance and templates and rubrics in terms of development of data management and sharing plans. I just wanted to mention that we do have a working group that has sort of been waiting in the wings while we've been involved in the pre-planning phase, just trying to, get some high-level decisions made in terms of next steps. And that working group does include some library participants, as well as a couple faculty representatives and administrators and costing folks. So we are definitely trying to take the more the merrier approach and make sure that we're involving all of the appropriate stakeholders. And we're going to be re-engaging that group as we move forward with really getting into the final planning phases and launch and evaluation of the pilot. So I think if anyone has suggestions for stakeholders we should make sure that we're including or is interested in participating, if you want to shoot an email to either myself or Jim Luther or Christy Keene, absolutely, this is an all hands on deck type of cultural shift that is being inspired by this policy, and we're looking forward to working with everyone.
Okay, thank you. I think that concludes all the questions that we can answer today. As I mentioned earlier, the budget related questions, we're going to provide additional guidance on that, as well as there are a few questions concerning the rubric for assessing the DMS plan and more is to come on that as well.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. I just want to thank Michelle so much, Michelle and her team, for being here today. And if we didn't get to your question or you still have lingering questions, please feel free to reach out, and we hope to answer those. And Michelle, we're just really grateful for your time and effort to partner with this community. We're a diverse community, and we appreciate the willingness to hear all of our voices as we get closer to January and beyond. So we're just really excited to participate and shape this pilot. So thank you, everyone, for being here today and asking these questions. I think they're great questions that we are definitely considering as we move forward in the pilot.
Thank you guys for always having me and putting up with me and my team. We appreciate the FDP and all that you guys do in the community for us, and the passion that you all have about research administration and, of course, NIH policies. So with that being said, I don't have anything else, and I don't think my team does either. We just appreciate the support. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody, that concludes our first session of the day. Our next session is the coffee hour, which will start at 1 p.m. Eastern time. We have various topics such as new member orientation, research data security, RCR training, and PMS. So please join us for that discussion at 1 p.m. And thank you for joining this session.